Connor Road. To some, it's just a simple route to the house. Somewhat basic when it comes to raising a family just above the poverty line.
But like the stories
from Elm Street. You know,
the nightmare.
Connor Road has its mysteries. Unbeknownst to many, Mr. Murray stalked little girls for years. I mean, their screams for help are somewhat amplified every time that it rains. Now, what I do know and can tell you is that at one point in time, Mr. Murray was loved by everyone. I mean, he fascinated the neighborhood with music mixes never heard before. This dude was a DJ before his time. Now, he might have gotten away with his crimes for a little over 10 years. That is until Connor Road played judge, jury, and executioner. It was just a little past midnight, July 18th, 1991. You first heard loud screams. Then the sky lit up for about 6 or 7 seconds with nothing but lightning bolts. Then came the thunder. The vibrations knocked the pictures off the walls off every home in the neighborhood except the homes on Connor Road. Now the raindrop touched the streets. At the time, Mr. Murray was making his way home, just as he did every night. But tonight, when he turned off Old Casita Road onto Connor Road, it would be his last night living. He was just midway across the second set of train tracks when his 76 Cutlass Supreme stalled and cut off. The bright red flashing lights along with the crossing guard seemed to be in slow motion as it lowered. Mr. Murray tried over and over again to crank the car, turning the ignition and smashing the gas, but all it did was whine. Then came the sounds of a train. His car was illuminated by the bright lights of a locomotion carrying freight from Fort Benning, the largest infantry base in the United States. Mr. Murray's eyeballs must have grown quarter size. He ripped the door handles off, tried busting the windows, but he couldn't get out. He was stuck. Then everything went silent. With both his hands clutching the steering wheel, he somehow focused on what was in front of him. It was the ghostly image of the girls that he raped, sodomized, and tortured. Then the sounds of the train horn, which echoed throughout the neighborhood. He covered his eyes with his hands, heart pounding like hell as the train came to a screeching stop, just inches away from his car. Saturated in fear, he turned the ignition and the car started. He crashed through the crossing guard and up Connor Road he went. Out of the 11 stop signs on Connor Road, he only had to face 2. Sweat dripped from his face, his heart still pounding. His urine was starting to settle under the seat as he approached the first stop sign. Now, he must have sat there a full 2 minutes with his signal light blinking left. Bump, bump was the sound of a horn from a vehicle that pulled up behind him. That sent fear through Mr. Murray all over again. You gonna turn or what, you freaking jerk? The driver yelled. Slowly, Mr. Murray emerged left, and up Connor Road he went. I'm your mama, I'm your daddy, I'm that nigga in the alley. I'm your doctor when you need, want some coke, want some weed. You know me, I'm your boy, your main man, thick and thin. Those are the lyrics from a song called I'm Your Pusher Man. It was playing on the radio. Mr. Murray tried to cut it off, but he couldn't. By this time, just as he passed Lambert Street approaching Francis' apartment, his tires started smoking. The asphalt was hot, and it was getting hotter. It was then that Kojak turned off Bowie Avenue onto Connor Road. In his white SUV, damn near breaking the sound barrier. Yeah, his car system was just that loud. Hey man, your car smoking. You need any help? Kojak said. Mr. Murray just frowned. When Kojak saw that, he rolled up his windows juiced up his radio, and hauled ass without even looking back. However, it wouldn't be the same for Mr. Murray. Before he could pull off, the streets were covered with fire. Then out of nowhere, 2 grav-locks appeared. 2 of the ugliest monsters you've ever seen. 3 eyes, 4 arms, 6 hands that resemble bear claws, 6-inch razor-sharp teeth, skin made of gravel with a muscular build. All stood about 6 feet tall. They came from the teeny-weeny house where they hang upside down during the day. They feed on fear and evil. Mr. Murray had both. He jumped out of his car and ran. But this, I tell you, wasn't wise at all. The street was way too hot. But somehow, Mr. Murray made it to the curb. Then all of a sudden, there was a loud roar mixed with screams. This might have been the strangest mix of sounds ever heard. One of the grav-locks grabbed him, bit into his shoulder, then tossed him into the air damn near 6 feet. Before he could hit the ground, the other grav-lock caught him, then went across his face with his claws. Blood squirted damn near 5 feet into the streets. Then the grav-lock bit off his face. The other grav-lock separated his torso as he walked into the streets, where the flames burned his body to a crisp. The grav-locks then slowly made their way back to the teeny-weeny house. The streets, they cooled down, and everything just went back to normal. Most criminals are majestic when it comes to breaking the law. But when you do evil shit to good people, it catches up to you the minute you hit Connor Road. You see, maybe not to humans, but to grav-locks, evil has a sweet smell that somehow triggers a high-powered path to revenge. Connor Road brings revenge to life. Sweet Pea, Tracy, and Thomas all stayed on Shimmick Avenue, a trilogy of evil. Tracy worked at a group home taking care of the elderly, something she's been doing for the last, 2 years. But for the last 6 months, every Friday and Saturday night, Thomas and Sweet Pea gave her $500 each to let them into the group home and have their way with the women that Tracy took care of. Thomas, retired Master Sergeant from the Army. He was very impatient and extremely rude. Now, what makes a person do such evil things? I'll never know. Sweet Pea, he was a decorated engineer that worked for the Columbus Airport. He started his Friday nights off with taking 2 Viagras. Okay, Tracy, she normally stayed in the front of the home so that she could see, keep an eye on anybody that might be pulling up. Sometimes she would peek through the keyhole of the door and masturbate while watching them have sex, but she would never let them see her duties. Her shift started at 12 a.m. Friday night, so around 11:30, she would go and pick up Sweet Pea and Thomas and have them ride with her so there would be no additional cars parked outside the home. On top of that, there was a garage, so no one never knew that Tracy was bringing Thomas and Sweet Pea in and couldn't see it. Once again, evil has a distinct smell, one in which grav-locks love. The teeny-weeny house shook. Slime started easing down the cracks of the walls. Mucus covered the floor damn near 3 inches thick, infested with fly larvae and maggots. It was 28 degrees. 6 inches of snow covered the streets. But for the city of Columbus, Georgia, it was like 28 degrees below zero. This might have been the most snow the city has ever seen. The kids went crazy. There was a neighborhood snowball fight. Full participation from everyone, the kids and the adults. Then came the darkness. It was the heavy ice that formulated on the branches. That's what brought a huge pine tree down on Casita Road, causing a detour to Connor Road. At the time, Mr. Butch came flying around the corner in his '82 soft-top Camaro, custom built. Riding shotgun was Dominique Talbot. Somehow Mr. Butch found out about his aunt being mistreated at the group home that Tracy was in charge of and was furious. Revenge now became his appetite. Thomas felt the wrath first. He was going to check the mail when Butch and Dominique pulled up. Butch jumped out and hit him with a 2x4. Dominique caught him with a 1-2 combination, and he dropped like a sack of bricks. But Mr. Butch wasn't satisfied. Dominique kicked him once, breaking 4 ribs. He just squealed. "Sit up, you freak," Dominique yelled. Mr. Butch then tied his hands behind his back, then to his legs. After that, he threw him in the trunk. All 3 eyes opened slowly on the grav-locks, one at a time. The sound alone of their hands going into the mucus on the floor would make a seasoned corner throw up. Their reptilian-type feet suctioned to the walls as they came down, only to raise up, anger, with an appetite for fear, evil, flesh, and blood. Then a loud roar, which could be heard for miles. Mr. Butch and Dominique looked at each other. "What the fuck was that?" Mr. Butch said as they pulled up to Sweet Pea's house. "I don't know," Dominique replied. When Sweet Pea came to the door, Mr. Butch hit him with a stun gun. Dominique picked him up and threw him in the back of the trunk along with Thomas, then slammed it down. They then hopped in the car and drove off. At the time, Mr. Butch and Dominique was headed to a secluded place in the woods where they had already dug 2 graves. But when they turned back on the counter road, they were stopped by 2 grav-locks standing in the middle of the streets, blocking them. In one leap, one of the grav-locks jumped over the car, landing in front of the trunk. Mr. Butch and Dominique didn't know what to do. They both were scared as hell. I guess because grav-locks are rarely seen, except for those who do evil things, but they never live to tell about it. The one in the front let out a loud roar. Mr. Butch and Dominique jumped out of the car and ran. The other one in the back ripped the trunk off while it looked at Sweet Pea and Thomas. Then it let out an even louder roar. "What in the hell is that?" Mr. Butch yelled as he went running through somebody's backyard, him and Dominique. Then they both stopped and watched as Thomas got pulled from the trunk. The other grav-lock grabbed Sweet Pea and held him up by his head, crushing his skull slowly. His legs shook in convulsion. Blood poured from his eye socket as if he was crying blood. Then his body went to a limp. Thomas yelled as loud as he could, but that wasn't going to help him at all. Death became his only option. Both the grav-locks turned and looked at Mr. Butch and Dominique, then let out a loud roar. Dominique and Mr. Butch hauled ass through the woods. Sweet Pea's face was then crushed. It sounded like an apple being torn in half. And I can tell you that it was the sound of his flesh separating from his bones and the pouring blood that made Dominique throw up everything he had on his stomach. The grav-locks then drugged their bodies back to the teeny-weeny house. But before they could go in, the scent of Tracy's evilness stopped them in their tracks. At the time, Tracy was leaving her aunt's house, Mrs. Mary, who stayed on Buford Avenue, a well-known place for drug users to go get high. She was looking for her boyfriend, Travis, who sold drugs out of her aunt's house. But Travis was nowhere to be found, which led her back to Connor Road, her final destination. Thomas was barely living. His cleanse on life was now down to seconds. One eye open, looking left. The other eye turned right towards Connor Road, while the third looked straight ahead. Evil has been detected. Ambitions of a Rider by Tupac Shakur, a well-known rap artist of the 90s, was Tracy's favorite song. She had it playing loud as it can go, which meant that she wasn't paying attention to what she was doing. On top of that, she was drunk as hell. She never saw the kids crossing the street until it was too late. She tried swerving once she heard the scream. Trace was so drunk she didn't realize that her lights was off until her bumper smashed into both little girls. The grav-locks looked at each other. They both let out a loud roar. In one leap, they both landed right in front of Tracy's car. One of the grav-locks grabbed both little girls and took a leap, landing back in front of the teeny-weeny house. While holding the two little girls, the grav-lock kicked Thomas' dead corpse to one side and Sweet Peas to the other, then went inside of the teeny-weeny house. The grav-lock then laid both of the lifeless girls down, submerging both their bodies into the mucus on the floor. The grav-lock then covered their crushed skulls with his claws and roared while looking up to the sky. It appeared as heaven was making a special visit to Earth. Then all of a sudden, the girls start coughing, then stood up, with mucus dripping from their body as if they went swimming in it. "Ew, we stink," one of the girls said, while staring at the grav-lock as it extended its arms out to both of them. With no fear at all, they walked towards the grav-lock and hopped in his arms. It stood up with both little girls, pushed the squeaky wood door open, walked outside, and in one leap, they all landed back in front of the little girl's house. Tracy was still sitting there in the car, with her head propped on the steering wheel, nodding in and out of conscious. She was just that drunk. And she stayed this way until the two little girls were safely put in the house. It couldn't have been no more than 2 or 3 seconds after that. Tracy was snatched out of her car. So hard and so fast with so much force, her wig remained on the front seat. Still permed. She didn't have time to yell. Hell, she couldn't. One of the grav-locks grabbed her bottom jaw, forcing 2 of his claws into her mouth, causing her mouth to damn near split in half. It sounded like a fat kid stepping on a pile of grapes with a pair of boots on. Then the grav-lock punched through her body. Her intestines dropped to the ground as he slowly removed his arm from her body. It was now just before 12, 10 minutes till to be exact. The grav-lock ripped Tracy's body into 2 pieces and started eating her from the inside out. All of a sudden you heard the sounds of a car hitting the brakes. And you heard the crash. It was Sissy John on the corner of John Smith and Connor Road. Okay now, true enough, John liked men, but he had a real heart for the kids that grew up in his neighborhood. He loved giving back to the community. Every year, he would take all of the kids aging from 7 to 14 years old to Six Flags over Georgia. And throughout the summer, he would arrange, at least 7 to 9 more trips. But he was up shit creek. John lost control of his car and hit a telephone pole head on. In the passenger seat was 12-year-old Kim Whitlow, a beautiful little girl up until now. Somehow, she wasn't wearing a seatbelt, so on impact, she was thrown through the windshield. Her face was covered with scattered pieces of glass. Her body leaked blood like a hose pipe with holes in it under low pressure and capped off. It was now the 5th hour after the 4th moon, closing the 5th year. This was how the spirits from the 3 little girls that Mr. Murray violated returned as grav-locks. Okay, for 55 hours, 55 minutes, 55 seconds, grav-locks are to feed, but must return to the teeny-weeny house or they will perish. The grav-lock didn't waste no time getting to Kim. Pulling the rest of her lifeless body out of the front windshield without cutting up her legs took more time than anything. Once he got her out and rubbed mucus over all of her wounds, her body began to heal instantly. Grav-lock was now down to 30 seconds. He launched to the teeny-weeny house and closed the door behind him. Sissy John, he couldn't be saved. His neck was broke on impact. The teeny-weeny house started shaking. You could hear movement on the inside as if there was a panic. The door opened, then it slammed shut. It took right around 2 or 3 minutes. The teeny-weeny house then slowly sunk into the ground as if it was engulfed in quicksand. For the next 5 years, I guess it's safe to ride down Connor Road if you've done some fucked up shit. Thanks for listening to my audiobook. Like, subscribe, share. I can be reached at 706-503-1194, 536 KennethJones@gmail.com.